at the implementation of the United Nations International Decade focusing on people of African descent. So let's take off, Mr. Priest, to have us a wonderful evening, afternoon here by ourselves. We have the studios to ourselves.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Well, Fred, since I'm the
doing it all.
Right. I'm going to go ahead and ask you some questions about what the program is and where we're going with that.
Okay.
We know that it is a United Nations initiative that started in 2014, actually. So the initiative itself, the decade for people of African descent runs from 2015 to 2025, correct?
Yes, or December 31st, 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right, and the initiative, the focus of the initiative is?
Yeah, looking at the plight, challenges, opportunities, whatever we want to call it, for people of African descent. But you know, there was a preceding year that was called the Year of the International Decade for People of African Descent. That started and launched the initiative. But just for the listening audience, the initiative goes back to, I think, 2001, started in a conference in Durban, in KZN, South Africa, called the International Conference on Racism and Xenophobia. But you know, unfortunately, during that time, I think that the U.S. did not participate. Well, they did participate, but they sent the secretary to the secretary to the secretary to the secretary, you know, which for me and for many made it appear that the U.S. was not necessarily interested in what was taking place. And we've yet to see any real traction movement taking place in the States, but we're getting there.
Hopefully we will. Anyway.
But keeping right on, the initiative basically looks at three main areas and one catch-all area. The areas of focus talks about recognition. How is it that the plight of people of African descent have not been recognized, as well as looking at how the people have been perhaps overlooked. So when we talk about recognition, we look at recognition in the broadest sense. But naturally, the first place to start with would be to look at the challenges, the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat faced by people of African descent, moving right into justice. And that's a long story. I mean, that's a huge topic there, because when you talk about justice, there's all types of justice that we seemingly miss out on. You know, there's a justice that talks about what's the terminology in relation to how we see ourselves. You know, when you talk about justice, why do we even need a Black Lives Matter? When you talk about justice, why is it that there's such a large percentage speaking about the U.S.? Why is there such a large percentage of people of African descent wasting away in these correctional or penal institutions? Because they're not correctional, they're penal institutions. So just as in terms of, why is it that we don't get the same benefits from the legal system? And there's just so much information out there on that. It's kind of saddening, but one day. The next one talks about development. Now, development talks about infrastructure. Let me start with the most important. It talks about the development of people of African descent from a human resource standpoint, but it goes right into looking at infrastructure. One of the areas that Ipad4u is focused on is looking at this whole content production industry, you know, the media, because truly when you look at the media and this whole emerging social media, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to educate each other, as well as address what has been lost due to a lack of recognition. So when we talk about development broadly, infrastructure from Cape Town to Cairo and from Kenya to Nigeria, what kind of railways, what kind of highways, what kind of infrastructure do we need? And yeah, when we include the diaspora, which is what the African Union has done, I applaud them, because a few years back, the Africa Union established a sixth region called the diaspora. And basically it's looking at how can we address, look at the needs of people of African descent outside of the continent. So development, again, comes back to what kind of connectivity do we have in terms of the electronic media? What kind of transportation do we have in terms of visiting each other across the continent? Transportation, logistics in terms of transporting our raw materials, natural raw materials, because most of what's happening on the continent is the taking away of the natural resources, your gold, your diamond, your oil, and what have you. And then the last one is what the program of activity, the United Nations Program of Activity, describes as being multiple aggravated encounters that deals with what we refer to as institutionalized racism. And that animal in and of itself, is another big picture. So those are the four areas: recognition, justice, development, and let me call it institutionalized racism, that we're looking at over the next, now what, 7 years?
Yeah, I think, what is 2018? So yeah,
Yeah.
7 more years.
Yeah.
And I just want to add what Fred and I, what our job is, because we actually had to apply to the United Nations in order to be able to promote and discuss this initiative. So what our job is to wake you up, to make sure you're woke about what's going on, and then hopefully you get lit and then participate in this initiative. We're asking people, we're not asking for money yet. We're just asking for you to carry on the conversation. Did you know that the diaspora itself, there are more Black Africans or African Americans or African Caribbeans or African South Americans? There are just numbers and numbers of them that are still being mistreated and taken advantage of throughout the world. So it is our focus that we want to, we're going to come to a point where we're actually going to be able to step out and stop some of this stuff. But right now we want the conversation. We want people to be aware of what's going on there.
Yeah, and like that terminology that you're using, that we want to really bring into the fold, being woke, being lit. But what we're really looking for is our disruptive ideas, none of the status quo. We're looking for ideas, content, suggestions that will take us off of the beaten path. Because surely, what's the saying, that if you keep on doing what you've always done, you're going to keep on getting what you've always got. And so, yes, there's research, a lot of research involved, but ultimately what we want to do is get traction and take actions,
And each UN member or member state should have an initiative under this program. And it's been, since we've been working on it for almost 2 years now, we have ran into where there are member states who there's no focus on it. And they have large Afro populations, but yet and still, well, even in the United States, you see there's no focus on the upliftment of people of African descent. It's even in the Caribbean, you see how they do in Haiti, and it's just, change is slow coming. And the only way to get change to move faster is that the people have to step up and talk about it and make it known that you guys, we elected you, or you stole the election, whatever it was you did, you're in power now, but we need you to focus on this aspect.
And we know that a lot of it begins with leadership. However, I think during my last broadcast, one of the philosophies that I've learned to live by came from a younger South African who shared it with me. And it goes like this: when you blame others, you relinquish the power to change. I can say you don't understand, or I can say I'm not communicating. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is bring the obligation to the person in the mirror, because truly there is no excuse for not at least learning about what the initiative is all about. On the other side of that, how can you, as a person of African descent, not be interested in such an initiative? So our whole endeavor, Ipad4u, is about trying to start a fire to the point that we take the responsibility of controlling our own destiny. And our destiny need not be where others have gone, because apparently it hasn't gotten others what they wanted. So what we're looking for is a transformation that will have a global impact, and not just on people of African descent, but other descendants around the world. So all of you are invited to visit, or the website. It's a long one, and I'm going to speak real slow. It's www.un.org/events/African Descent Decade. That should get you there. And yeah, take a time to visit the website, because there's some interesting things happening, even though we talk like nothing is happening. There's a working group. There's a working group that I say is just blazing a trail. Already they visited more than 10 countries looking at what they were doing. And the objective of their visit, is basically to look at the challenges faced by people of African descent. And as Courtney was saying, there's over 200 million people of African descent located throughout the diaspora. And one of our endeavors is to build a bridge or a landing pad for those of you who might want to visit the continent, to be able to come and see where you can make a contribution, because surely there's enough for us to do. I long to go to Brazil, but there are barriers. My barrier is lack of being able to speak Portuguese, and that's so unfortunate. However, time will come where we'll be bilingual. Most Americans, as you know, we only speak one language, but we're working on that through technology. Brother Priester?
Yeah, but they'll speak English with you in Brazil. That's no problem. I know a lot of brothers that's been there.
Yeah, but as Mandela said, when you learn a person's language, you can speak to their heart, and ultimately, that's what I want to talk to when I'm visiting there. Okay.
Right, so, well, let me ask you, because there's no mention, and this is an African American concept or ideal. But there's no mention of what's hot in the States, which is reparations. There's still so many people, so much discussion on reparations. Do you have an opinion?
Well, but before I go back to the States, would reparation be a part of, like here in South Africa, give back the land? Is that the type of reparation you're speaking of?
Yeah, that's paying back for supposedly wrongdoings, or the idea here is that the land was taken from somebody, and it needs to be given back to somebody.
Because that's what's going to bring about some degree of economic parity. But going back to the U.S., it's been one of the things that most of our politicians have shied away from talking about, and when you look at the economic structure in relation to who owns the wealth, it gets to be a little bit of a quagmire. I was speaking to an individual. I had to drop a call for service, and I was speaking to an individual who must feel comfortable with me, a person of European descent. And he first wanted to hand it off to me to ask the question, well, why can't we just get over it? And my response to that is, can we define that it? Because defining that it is where the challenge starts. Is it the fact that I now reside or was taken to a country not of my choice, but as a piece of property? Is that the it? Or is that the it? Or is it having to do with having been enslaved? Or is the it has to do with to some degree, people of African descent, especially African American, are the so-called disinherited. Disinherited from the standpoint that few of us are able to find where we are from on the continent. We identify with the continent. So what is the it? Maybe that's where this whole decade should start with. Let's just unpack and describe the it. Is the it the fact that we have not been recognized? Is the it the fact that we don't receive justice in a lot of instances? So the conversation could start with let's start off by defining the it. Yeah. Yeah. It's a small word,
Yeah.
but it's a big word when you talk.
It's a huge word,
Yeah.
Internationally, because even here in Africa, there is some progress being made. That we talk about what some of the West African countries are trying to do in
Ghana.
yeah, well, like Ghana, yeah, with the Ghana has the American society actually that, and where they actually invite African Americans, or it's open for African Americans to come there, and they have grants and other things to try to assist them in getting established.
And I want, but let me also add there, Courtney, because I don't want us to be too selfish. But that invitation also extends to people of African descent in Brazil, people of African descent in other places. Yeah, So yes, while there's seemingly more African American taking advantage of it, maybe for obvious reasons, but yeah,
The invitation goes out to people of African descent. Understood that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
and that excites me. That excites me. And something else in kind of the same spirit, Nigeria, and Weston is just raunchy what our president said about.
Oh, I
Yeah.
don't know if you want
Okay, I don't want to go there. Let me come back. Let me come back.
Because no, we can actually bring it
But
up.
let me keep this thought
It's
on.
been on my heart because my man Kwame
Yeah.
had sent me another Facebook thing that talked about the description of Hobbs, the guy that was killed in the fire that was roasted.
Yeah.
Back in the day, and then about your president and his comment about about African countries, not really about the young man, the soldier who went in and rescued 5 Americans, or 4. He actually physically rescued 4 and died trying to rescue the 5th, and both of them died in the fire. And his comment was so insensitive that African nations are less than. But Fred and people, that they believe that we are less than. So it's not really their issue. You know what I mean? They're I'm not gonna say European, white. It's just that, okay, just say those people. Like when they used to refer to us as them people. But like those people have a certain view of African, Black, or anything other than them.
Other than European.
Right. Not even European. Just anything other than
Yeah.
Because and then that anybody else is less than them. So they're gonna degrade and say ignorant things like he said the other day.
And I mean, I wish I could really take a poll on that one, because I don't know from a spiritual standpoint that I believe or think that they believe, they meaning European descent, let me work with that one for a while, that we are lesser. It's just something that needs to be propagated, that has been sold to make them feel better or more comfortable with how they treat people of African descent. But then I can't stop there, because, really the whole essence of things seems to be anywhere a European visited and there was no European, then that was their discovery, as though the people who inherit the place.
That's what I'm saying. That their whole concept is that you are nothing. So I discovered you. You already there. I discovered you and your land. you already there making a living, growing, having farm, and helping me eat.
Mm-hmm.
But yet and still, because of I am who I am, and you are nothing, that I discover you. You are there, okay, and you can count many countries where it happened.
Yeah, yeah.
So many where it happened, where the indigenous people just had no position.
Yeah, and I think, do you think that that might, and listening audience, and I'm asking you too, do you think that that might come from an inferiority complex? Because you can maybe reduce this thing. I was watching a show the other night where they were talking about it. A lot of that thinking mentality has to do with genetic survival. I mean, and the fact is the reason that perhaps they want to pretend that they think that we are lesser because it makes them feel better to think that there is a lesser, if that makes sense. But I don't believe inherently, intrinsically, that they can hide behind the proposition that we are lesser. But let me moving because I missed where I was trying to go positively, and that was when I was talking about my brothers, sisters in Nigeria that is working on the concept of the door of return. Now, that contrasts what we find in Ghana, in a country that has been the first to step out and look at sending invitation to people of African descent to come visit, settle in, contribute to Ghana's development. The door of no return. The door of return that Nigeria espouses to is no matter where you are on the globe, you have a place in Africa. You bring your talents, you bring your skills, you bring your resources, because let's face it, if you didn't go there by choice, which is the situation with most people of African descent in Brazil and in America and in the Caribbean, they didn't go there by choice. So what's the affinity other than a lot of people say, no, but we built this country, we built the U.S. But there's just so much to do here in Africa. There's so much. We have 70% of the arid land means that we can grow. So maybe what we need to do, Brother Priester, what we need to do is just promise the Europeans globally that we won't let them starve. But the fact is that there is a new day emerging in Africa to the point that we're taking control of our own destiny. Yes, we'll share some of our natural resources with you, but you can't come take and own these resources in a way that is not going to benefit the people. I'm going to say who was intended for, because those resources, your aluminium, your aluminum, your gold, your diamond, your iron ore, your zinc, your copper, all of those things we can use to add value and increase our standard of living, which speaks to the component of development in the initiative. But what I want to do is try to stay more so over on what we should do as compared to what they did in an attempt to identify this that we should be working on.
Well, I agree with that part 100%. Because even the reparations end of it, I truly believe that we cannot ask them, and when I speak of them, it's Portugal, England, Netherlands, Dutch, and the other ones who participated in that form of slavery for reparations. Where I think the reparations should come from would be where we came from. Not the people that stole you,
but the people who sold you.
But the people who sold you.
That's interesting. I'm a big fan of research. In my quality profession, we have a slogan concept that says, "In God we trust, all else bring data." It's not enough for you to come to the table with your experience, insight, intuition, And it's not that I negate your authority, but where is the data to support the decision that you are trying to get us to buy into? So then, if we research that, I mean, and you reminded me of a few years back when I was working in Nigeria, and I had an encounter where undoubtedly there was a person of African descent who had some problem with me as a person of African descent being in Nigeria doing what I was doing. So they gave me a hard time from the standpoint of asking unrelated questions. One question that they asked, I remember explicitly, was asking, what am I doing? What are you doing in Africa? Don't you have enough problems in America without being over here in our business? That was a valid question, audience.
Yeah.
But my comeback was, you're absolutely correct. There's enough problems in the U.S. that I could be working on without being here. But here's a list that I made to bring to you, a list of our mistakes, hoping that you don't have to make the same ones. You know, the fact is that there's a lot of xenophobia going on in the States. You know, do we have to have that same type of encounter here? So that question, that kind of settled him for a minute. But then right after lunch, he came back at me again, you know. Well, you know, you're not an African, you know, you are a Black American. I say, true that, but I can be who I want to be, and I label myself as a person of African descent. But hold on, participant, the person in the audience. I know what the problem is. I haven't been painfully honest with you when you ask me, what am I doing in Africa, specifically Nigeria? If the truth be told, and this is what I think you were referring to, Brother Priester, if the truth be told, really I'm here to find out who sold me, because in the States I know who bought me, and that slave owner was named Thompson. But what I don't know is, how did I end up on the ship? So okay, maybe that's the reason I'm here.
Yeah, let's hold that thought as we take a quick break.
Sometimes I feel so alone, baby. I call your heart, but there's no one at home. Taking a toll on my pride. I'm reaching out, but there's no one inside.
No, it doesn't feel right when I look in your eyes. I know love is blind, but the heart doesn't lie. I'll ask one more time, maybe this time it's right. So tell me, girl, what's deep in you?
I feel like all of my days trying to suss out just how things got this way. I thought that we were in love, but I swear by now I don't know what you want. I make sure that I give you quality time. But lately I feel you're not home by design. But still I'm gonna try to give you the love of my life, in hopes that you
I'm from in the States, there's a saying that dog won't hunt, meaning that idea won't fly anymore. You know, we're not going to go along with what has been happening in the past in terms of how Africa's resources, land, you know, is being occupied by other people. You know, you can stay, you can live, we make you feel welcome, but the ownership and us having servitude to you going forward, especially, and don't get me wrong, I'm not disillusioned to think that we can change the course of this ship in the next 7, 8 years, or even during a decade. But it's kind of like we can start to bank it. When I say bank it, we can start turning the ship, because unlike a speedboat that you can turn around almost, you know, within a certain 20 or 30 yards, you have to take the ship out to bank it. So what we have to do first is to start with looking at the it. You know, I'm gonna phrase that one like we brought on woke, being lit.
Mm-hmm.
I want to operationally define what is the it.
Okay.
And for me, the it is that we have been deprived of certain inalienable rights, and we are just reclaiming those rights.
Right.
It's not about condescending toward you or another race. It's about getting our house in order, because surely, you know, our Ubuntu spirit, the spirit of people of African descent, kind of like what Mandela was saying, Africa is for all of those who live here,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't live here and think that you own here.
That you own here.
Yeah, that ain't it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So looking forward to some exciting
Well,
times.
I like that it, but you know, you want to try to stay positive, because you mentioned something that also is important to me, and that's the black on black crime. And I don't know. I mean, it's logical to me that if you live in an area and there's no white people, that you're gonna have black on black crime. If you live in an area when it's mixed, you're gonna have mixed crime. If you live in a white area, you're gonna have white crime. Right? But I'd have to check the numbers to see if that black on black crime is
more than the white on black.
Right, more than the white on black, or
I
more,
doubt it.
or more than the mixed on mix.
I doubt it very seriously.
But I mean, I come from the hood, and in the hood, in my day, there was limited crime. 46 in Wabash, there was limited crime. I moved to South Shore, to a white area, where I was the third black family on the block. And there was white crime against black, and then of course, as it grew on, yes, there was black crime against white also, but there was limited black on black crime because black folks didn't have anything. Yeah, you know. So I mean, you know, we just have to. It just irks me that, and I just need to see the numbers on hood crimes, because that's where it would be important if you in South Shore, if you in Inglewood, where it's a majority black, they would be important to see those numbers, as if, because you know, if you're in Hyde Park, down the street from Obama's house, that there's more security, more police, more policing and everything else, so there may be less total crime.
Yeah.
You know, but okay, that's enough of that. But that's just.
But hold on, but stay there though, because you know, one thing historically that negates the idea of the black person of African descent being violent and being a criminal. If we just go back historically, you know, the European history is laden with pillaging, you know, killing, raping continents, taking over other people's land. So if we just look at from, and I don't want to say intrinsic, but when you look at the history of the European in relation to criminal activity, and when I say criminal activity, when you invaded the land and you take over when you invaded the land and imprisoned the people or created reservations, You know, those are crimes against humanity
Right.
by whatever definition. Now,
Yeah.
if you want to call it criminal or what have you, but see, I don't buy into the idea that, how should I say it, being a criminal, it's only what the Europeans define as being criminal. I think it's criminal when you talk about, if we can discuss it black on black, is the general respect, the misogynist.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm saddened about one thing, and that is how we as men of African descent sometimes don't treat our women with the respect that I think that they deserve. And I'm genuine in this spirit because when I look at historically, you know, as a male person of African descent, I haven't delivered. And I'm speaking about myself as a man. One of the problems with me measuring delivery is that the rule or the metric has been set by how many dollars or how many rands or how much you can acquire, how much wealth, you know, materialistic things that you can acquire. And I think I explained that earlier. You know, we worked, what, 300-400 years, you know, for basically no pay.
No pay at all.
You know, and couldn't own anything. So now you want me to compete with you for success based on how much money or resources or material things that we have. And I'm saying, but that don't seem fair.
Right.
However, it does not exonerate me from having a conscience about taking care of the African girl child. I'm keen on that one, very keen on that one.
All right. Back in a second.
1873 FM.
Jump off on that one a little bit.
Na, 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 na. Oh, 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 oh. Chira chita mwiko mambi love you when I nena kana tauli chipe Chira chita mwiko mambi love you when I nena kana tauli chipe Okenga kusumina ukube chipe betawa betambula nangula
1873 FM.
All right. Welcome back. Fred Thompson and I having a discussion on the International Decade of People of African Descent here on the afternoon drive, standing in for Gamani. We missed you, man. Hopefully everything will be good. Fred, you can continue at what where we left off.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about closing comments on that, was talking about the girl child of people of African descent, because they've had to, how should I say it, bear the brunt of this catastrophe, considering looking at what has happened to their male counterpart, and it's so sad. It's so sad. And I'm saying it's so sad because I can imagine, though I've never spent, and this is not bragging, it's more grace and blessing, I've never spent a night in jail, but I can imagine a person having to spend 2 or 3 years in jail for a crime that they didn't commit, and what happened to their families, and their children while they were there, due to a justice system that was biased against them from the arrest all the way to the institution. So I'm just saying we can make excuses for why we meaning men of African descent, but ultimately, I think we need to step up to the plate and look at a new direction, especially for the benefit of the youth. Now, forget the statistics, but the abundance of youth that are on the continent here, I forget the exact ages, but we have enough to, I often think about this, was it Courtney, in the States? Was it the New Deal that one of the Roosevelt boys did to be able to lay roadways, develop infrastructure, and what have you? Oh man, I wish we could get our African countries and leaders to come up with a New Deal to let's just lay highways all across the continent. You know, let's just build towers, set up our communication towers. And these are things that are within our reach. We just have to have the will. And I place the responsibility right back on us, men of African descent, because how many women presidents do we have across Africa? Two?
One now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, because what's the name? One in Liberia. So she's gone.
Okay. So the leadership is in our hand, and there's some good things.
Well, Fred, I think that is a worldly point, actually. That because I helped raise 3 queens, and I'm married to one. I got a sister, so I do have the outlook that yes, the world would be totally different if women of African descent were allowed to step up and step in to the positions that are open and necessary for them.
And I'm sorry, your homegirl. I'm sorry to interrupt, but your homegirl said the time is on. Oprah. Yeah, because the award that she recently got, she said our time was up.
Well, she said all women, and I agree with all women, because it is.
Yeah. So I can buy into that.
It is.
But you touched on something. Sorry again to interrupt. You touched on something, and this is listening audience. We coined a new word, just like well, not new word, but we have the concept of imagineering. Imagineering is akin to engineering, but the imagineering for people of African descent, the imagineering for this decade. Imagine in Africa, imagine people of African descent if we had gotten rid of the baggage and the shackles that the its. If we could get past the its and go on our merry way, what would that journey look like? What would that journey look like? Where would we end up? What would we aspire to? Aspirations are brought out in the African Union's 2063 strategy. I think they have about 7 aspirations. Kind of tie into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. But I'm just saying, we have all the crayon, we have all the chalk. We don't have any, let's say, inhibitors, restriction. If we could paint the picture for people of African descent, what would it look like? And that's what we refer to as imagineering. So if we could do that, and frankly, if we talk about ideally utopia, what would the situation look like, or what would the reality be for people of African descent? If we had our own way, what would we do?
Well, that's a good question. And I would have to put that on the audience. Maybe they'll send us some Facebook ideas and some things on what they, if, and that's a big if. In how do you say that word? Not engineering, but
it's called imagining. And then we just put the earring on it. Imagineering. Okay. Yeah. So in imagineering that the world was equal, or that we had this. Well, it's that we had the same start, or the people would have the same opportunities. Imagine that you would have the same level playing field throughout. Okay. Right. We've gotten reparation. We've gotten our land back. We've all those things. You can't imagine. How are you going to imagine getting the land? You got to. I don't know about that one. I think you need to imagine just an even playing field, and then go from there. Because if you go and ask for the things that you think are due, but now, because please to remember, we're not engineering. We're imagineering. I got that. And there's a lot of talk now, and you brought it up earlier about reparation. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, okay, you got it. We're giving it to you. Okay. Who giving it? No. I'm saying you have it. Remember, we are painting, we are
Right,
imagineering.
it's imagination, which
Yeah.
I don't have any.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but see, and I'm trying to get to this because what's the saying? Not, I don't want to go into quoting scripture too much because I
Mhm.
don't know it that well. What is this saying about where there is no vision,
yeah, men perish, basically.
people perish?
Right,
And that's all I'm trying to do with the
Right.
imaginary.
right.
Let's just create a vision. Let me
Mhm.
give you part of my vision. Part of my imagineering vision is that Africa would become the #1 destination for the world.
Oh yeah, we said that.
Okay,
Right.
that's
It's
I'm
no
just imagining.
there is no reason that, and I'm talking to, I got some friends looking at us
Mm.
in the States, and I'm talking to them saying there's no reason why you would move to Georgia to retire
When you could come to
when you could come to any place in Africa.
Well,
You don't
not
have to come, you don't have to be my neighbor. You know what I mean? You don't have to come
Yeah.
to spend Christmas by the pool. Tommy knows about that. There's a few people who know about that.
Mm.
But yes, why isn't it that even though we know it takes 16 to 18 hours to get here, but once you're here, you're here. But
Okay, now-
and because when you based on dollars and you go into a foreign country, those with retirements or those with Social Security or whatever it is, if you would just at a minimum multiply that money by 10, right? And when you multiply that money by 10, you still would pay the same dollar amount for your purchases, or even less in a lot of cases. So why isn't Africa attractive, at least to the seniors and the retirement people?
But see, okay.
Yeah, we know I understand that the propaganda about Africa is still alive, that the European really does not want Africa to get the right positive attention
and attitude,
right? Because they know that if it do, they're going to lose position in what they do. Because as you know, in the States, it's that 1% in the States, and that 1% actually is international. It's just not the U.S. Unfortunately, here in Africa, I'm not sure how true it is, but at least in South Africa, that 80% or maybe even 90% of the wealth is still controlled by
the Europeans.
The Europeans or
it's
whoever.
Global. I agree with you. It's global.
It's global. That's what I'm saying. It's global.
But now, Brother Peaster,
Yeah.
you what I want to position seriously is this idea, a concept of imagineering. Let me imagineer for a minute and say that there's no visa requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's not a big imagineering, because if you look at what has been developed in the U.S. in terms of traveling from coast to coast, I mean, how many visas do you need to have to travel across the U.S.? Not one.
I mean, you don't need a visa to go to Canada, to another country. You don't need.
All that I'm saying is, and we can do that. Mm-hmm. Imagine an infrastructure where you could get on a blue train, red train, black train in Cape Town, and travel all the way up to Egypt. I'm just saying, I'm imagineering these things, what it would be like. Imagine where education was or is your right, which means that it shouldn't cost you anything. Now there are certain criteria that would apply. I'm just imagining or trying to create a vision that our audience and people of African descent could buy into, to the point that we take control of our own destiny. We might be going somewhere else totally from where the Europeans went. Our whole philosophy of life, might be something different. And I'm sure that it would be, because number one, we wouldn't be going around oppressing the rest of the world. As a matter of fact, we would be welcoming people. So that imagineering is what I want the audience to be able to buy into and visit the website.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, Fred. I'm with you on your imagineering. I even know how to say it now. All right. Give me in 1 minute, close out. 1 minute. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Audience, best wishes for the best year you've ever had in 2018. I'm looking forward to a lot of things taking place, and I'm looking for a lot of people of African descent to get woke and lit. And don't worry so much about the it. Just create our own vision through some imagineering that says, look, we figured out that life is about more or something different than what you've led us to believe with the present educational system. That's my spiel for the day. Thank you, listening audience, for tuning in.
Well, I got a friend that just sent me something, Barbara, and this is what she's saying.
Okay.
I believe our men should stay in the forefront of society and be the head of our homes and engineer our economy. Our women continue being builders of our homes and mothers to our children, allowing our men as providers. Why should women step ahead of our male counterparts to build a better way of life? And I think, and that in closing, Barbara, love you. Thank you. That also put us in the position that we're in today because nobody's home, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's raising the children. So we need to also look at that part of it. But, okay, it's Coach Corner. Courtney Priester standing in for my man Gamani here at the Afternoon Drive. We want to thank you for listening in and tuning in. We see you next time, Sunday, 6 to 9.
1873 FM.
Is it? But see, are we on?
Touch it.